Good evening, all my friends in TV land. This is Senior Issues, etc. I'm your host, Vita Verdon, and the show I have for you tonight is something I know you'll be interested in, so hurry up, get your drink, your coffee, tea, milk, beer, and it's good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because this show is seen at a variety of times. And what I have for you tonight, or this afternoon, is we're going to talk about the subject of physical therapy. And I have a very experienced therapist with me today. He's been 27 years experience, so he's got a lot of knowledge under his belt. I know he's too young and good looking to really seem to be working this long, but I take his word for it, and I know his wife, so I know he's telling us the truth. And he is from the Advocate Condell, which is located in Libertyville, Illinois, but he works out between the hospital and he works out of a clinic in Grays Lake, which is part of Advocate Condell. So I want to give a nice warm welcome to the show to Scott Beckman. Good to have you here today, Scott.
Thank you for having me.
I know last year we had your wife, Teresa, and I was hoping I could get the two of you together. Maybe next year we'll be able to, but I know you said that she's teaching maybe you can tell our audience.
Today, Teresa is working at St. Ambrose University, where they invite her once a year to come in and teach their physical therapy students how to do pool therapy. Yeah, so she'll be in a pool all day long working with teaching students different techniques and what they can use in order to help their patients in the future.
That's where I met her, because I do a hot water class 3 times a week at Advocate Condell here in Libertyville. And to get started, I know the audience, we're in our 12th season, and everybody likes to connect the face with knowing something about the person. So maybe you could give us a little lowdown on where you came from, and where you went to school and how you got to get into therapy.
Okay.
So give us a rundown on Scott, okay?
I certainly would love to. Well, I started becoming interested in physical therapy when I was in high school. And I don't have a great story about I had this terrible injury and then I went through rehab and learned about physical therapy in that way. I never did that. What ended up happening was I had an interest, and actually during my senior year in high school, my advanced chemistry teacher decided that she thought that since most of the students in her class had some inkling towards healthcare, that she was going to expose us to every one of those different professions. And so what she did was she took me over to the local hospital, and I grew up in a town of Carroll, Iowa, in which there was one physical therapist in the entire town. And she brought me over to introduce myself to him. He kind of took me under his wing and helped foster my interest in physical therapy. So then what I did was I went to the University of Iowa, where I studied. I have an undergraduate degree in general science, and at that time the way physical therapy education was set up was that you did your 4 years of undergraduate first, and then you went to physical therapy school. So I did my 4 years of undergraduate work at the University of Iowa, have a degree in general science, was admitted then into the physical therapy program, where we spent 2 years of studying just physical therapy. Came out after that, and I took my first job in Waterloo, Iowa. Worked there for 3 years, where I had an exceptional mentor, and decided then, after a while, I started thinking that I wanted to do something more.
Why did you call it exceptional mentor?
I learned from a gentleman by the name of Walt Swoboda, and Walt Swoboda was a gentleman who was not the best hands-on physical therapist that I ever worked with. But what he was good at was treating the entire patient. And so when you came in to see Walt, Walt would greet you with a big smile. He'd shake your hand. He'd give you a big hug. He'd say, "Vita, how you doing today?" Even if you weren't Walt's patient, Walt would make sure that you felt comfortable when you were in the clinic. Then what Walt did was he would, then he'd go through the regular therapy maneuvers just like the rest of us do. But what he was a master at was making sure that the patient felt comfortable when they were in the clinic. the thing that you have to realize is that in our profession, nobody really wants to come and see us. Because the reality is that if they had their pick, they'd never have this condition to start with. And so consequently, what Walt taught me was that you have to make it a pleasant experience when someone comes in. For the total person. For the total person, not just treating a back, not just treating an elbow, not just treating a knee, but treating the entire person.
Well, now, how did you meet your wife?
That's a good question. Well, then, after I decided worked in Iowa for 3 years, I decided I wanted to do something else. And so I started doing my research, and there were 5 programs in the country, educational programs, that had really what I wanted to do. And I wanted to specialize in musculoskeletal physical therapy. There were 5 programs in the country that I could choose from. Northwestern University had one of those programs. I applied to Northwestern, was fortunate to be admitted, and that is what brought me to Chicago. I went through the academic program at Northwestern, and with all good intentions, it was supposed to take me 1 year to do this program. Ended up taking me 6, okay? And there was one day when I had already lined up my next job. I was going to do my research for Northwestern, but I was going to go back to Iowa City and do my research there. Well, I was all lined up. I was going to go work in this clinic, and in March of 1989, I got a call from the clinic, and they said, "Don't bother coming. We're closing the clinic." 1 week later, I met the woman who is now my wife, and there is a rule that when you meet a Chicago girl, you live here for the rest of your life. I didn't know that was a rule at the time, but evidently that's what people tell me. So I met my wife, and we dated for a year and decided that we would get married, and it became a physical therapy household.
Oh, well, I would call that rule destiny.
I think you're right.
Destiny. Well, now, you have children?
I have 3 children. My oldest is a senior. He is 17 years old. My middle child is a high school sophomore, and she is 15. And I have a youngest child who is 13, and he is an 8th grader right now.
Well, now you have 1 big kiss for your wife and 3 for your children, so that's 4 kisses. That's good. And so that got you here. And so then what is the first job you started at?
When I was actually at Northwestern, I was working part-time, and I was working at St. Joseph's Hospital in the city while I was going to school. Then what I did was I worked there for 1 year, and then I decided to go to work for the Rehab Institute of Chicago, which was very convenient because the academic program through Northwestern that I was doing was actually on the 13th floor of the Rehab Institute of Chicago. Physical therapy was on the 12th floor. So it made it very convenient to see patients on the 12th floor, go to school on the 13th floor. Worked at the Rehab Institute of Chicago for roughly 7 years. Then decided when we started having a family, then I moved and started working at Highland Park Hospital. Worked there for 3 years, and then the Rehab Institute of Chicago decided to try to bring me back when I opened up a clinic in Northbrook for them. Stayed there for about 4 years, then decided that I wanted to even be closer to home, and that's what brought me to Advocate Condell.
So then you started at Advocate Condell. Did you start right in the hospital?
No, I started working in the Center Club in Gurnee. And then gradually, as Condell grew, we opened up the Grays Lake Clinic. I live in Grays Lake, and so it became very convenient to work and live in the same town. So I opened up their Grays Lake Clinic for them, and that clinic has now been open for 7 years. Just recently, when the new West Tower was opened at Condell, then I was asked to go to work there 2 days a week to split my time between Grays Lake and the hospital.
Well, to start with, what we need is, could you give us just plain English, real simple definition of what is physical therapy?
To put it in a nutshell, physical therapy is really defined as the restoration of movement. And from there diverges several different types of physical therapy in which we look at trying to control pain. We look at trying to restore mobility, restore strength, restore the person. But mostly what we're trying to do is we're trying to restore the person's ability to function.
So it's not just one thing. It's restoration, whether it's a break, whether it's from some other causes. It's a whole variety of causes.
Absolutely.
So that has to be determined by a physician, right?
The physician is the entry point to the medical
The
system.
diagnosis.
Right. They make the diagnosis, and then what the physician does is that then if they feel that physical therapy is indicated, they then write a prescription for physical therapy. That's what the patient brings to us, is the prescription.
All right. So now we've got it down to what physical therapy is, and it's diagnosed by the doctor. Now, what if there comes an instance that your adaptation of what the person is in your diagnosis differs from the doctor?
Happens quite often, actually.
Yeah.
And
Well, I've had people ask me this. That's why I'm asking you.
happens quite often, and the key for me as a professional is to have a good working relationship with a physician. Because if I know the physician well, I can call the physician and say, you know, this is what I'm seeing. And it's a little different than what you had written down. The other thing to remember is that there's usually a lapse in time. The patient came to the doctor with these particular symptoms and then waited for maybe a week to get into physical therapy. Sometimes those symptoms have changed in the week since the doctor saw them. So it's not necessarily that the doctor was wrong, it's that the issue became that the patient's symptoms changed.
It extended, so it changes it. And so then you have to adapt, right?
The key thing is that when a patient comes to see us, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to perform our own evaluation. Because how a doctor evaluates and how a physical therapist evaluates are very different.
So you need the doctor's evaluation, then you need the therapist's evaluation.
That is correct.
That's a very important thing. Well, we're going to get in deeper into it, but now it's time for Vita's Pearls of Wisdom. There's a few things I want to talk to you about today. One of the things, keeping in the line of therapy, is to avoid it. You know, you have to keep on moving. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And so, you know, even if you feel that because of age, because of, it doesn't matter, because no matter what your condition is, there's still a movement that can fit you. I know I live in a senior building, and there's a variety of ages and a variety of disabilities in the building. But what we have is we have a group there, we call it Healthy Living, and we do a series of exercises that are sitting down. And there's still a value. They may not be of the potency of one has when you do it on land and standing up and squats and all that, but it still has a value to it. And, you know, a muscle is a muscle. You have to keep those things going. So no matter, you know, what your stage of is, you know, before you need physical therapy, you need to learn how to move a bit every day. And in that process of moving, you know, you can establish something. And, you know, you think, oh, it's just so overwhelming, I can't get off the couch. But you can get off the couch. And remember, just do baby steps. So if you said it, this is where it starts, with these little gray cells right here. And so what you look at them and say, listen, I could do it. And if you start with one little baby step and say, you know, I can do 2 movements a day. 2 movements parlays into 4 movements, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's what this show is all about, because we are this generation that has lived with a greater abundance of us living longer than any other generation. So we have to learn how, in living longer, what does it take for us to do? I have a couple other tips for us. I've been reading a book on everything green, and you have to eat things that are green. And I know one of the most loaded with vitamins and all the things that we really need is kale. And I just got a tip on kale. You know, a lot of people don't eat kale because they say it has a bitter aftertaste. To remove that bitter aftertaste from kale, what you do is you blanch it and take it out immediately out of the hot water, the blanching water, and put it in a bowl with ice. And that process will take all the bitterness out of it. And I want to leave you with this one thought, and the thought is, you know what worry is. It's an old man carrying a load of feathers, and it's an old man carrying a load of feathers and thinking that it's lead. And so I just leave you with that, and we're going to get back to this therapy. Now, getting back to this therapy, I know that there's a lot of guidelines to follow, and since we have basically a senior audience, can you break it down and go into some of the Medicare requirements? Because I think that's real important.
Right. It's a great question, because oftentimes it's one of the most misunderstood part of a person's Medicare experience. Medicare has 3 requirements for physical therapy. The number 1 requirement is that the therapy has to be ordered by a physician. So the physician has to write a prescription for physical therapy. Number 2, the therapy has to be provided by a licensed physical therapist. And the therapy needs to be done by a physical therapist. And I will explain that in a bit. And the third criteria is that the patient has to have function limitations. Okay, so let's talk about the first one. The first one is the easy part, is the physician has to write an order for physical therapy. That's easy. They write their diagnosis, they write physical therapy, what they think the therapist needs to do, and then signs the prescription. That's the easy part. The second part would be that the patient requires the skills of a licensed physical therapist. Just because someone has, let's say for example, someone has a weak elbow, okay, and it's causing function limitations where they can't get their arm up in order to feed themselves. All right, so do they really need a physical therapist in order to strengthen that arm? Well, maybe they need to be seen once by the physical therapist for them to show what to do, and they still might be able to make progress, but they don't need the physical therapist anymore to get that progress. Physical therapist shows them what to do, they take it, they go do those things at home, and they restore their function. All right? So, again, number 1, prescription. Number 2, that you need the skills of a licensed physical therapist. And number 3 is that there are function limitations. So many times, a person will come in and say, you know what, my leg hurts. All right? And that's a good reason to come to physical therapy. And I'll ask them, well, how does that leg pain influence what you can do? And a lot of times they'll say, well, it doesn't limit me at all. I can do everything that I want to do. By Medicare's definition, then they no longer can have physical therapy. All right? However, more and more I'll say, okay, let's think about this a little bit, because so many times a person comes in and they say, you know, it doesn't affect me, but when I really start to ask them and really start to go a little bit deeper, they'll say, well, yeah, I can't do that. So let's say, for example, the person comes in and says, yes, my leg hurts, and at first they say, oh, I can do everything. Well, can you get up from a low chair? No, I can't do that. That hurts my leg too much, and I can't get up from a low chair. So I've learned that I need to sit on a higher chair. So what you're really telling me then is that you do have a function limitation. You can't get up from a low chair. And so, again, the person has to have some type of function deficit.
Well, Medicare's definition and our definition vary. And I know most therapy is given in increments, right?
That's correct.
And I'd like you to go into that the doctor's order may not be Medicare's order.
Correct.
So the two have to match. Could you go into that a little bit?
Absolutely. So
because that's important.
Let me give you an example, and let's say, okay, that the physician you come to me with a prescription that says 3 times a week for 4 weeks.
Right.
All right? And so oftentimes then, because of how this has been presented in the past, person comes and says, well, I'm going to see you for 12 times. And I'll look at them and say, well, maybe you'll see me for 12 times, because let's say when I do my examination, I realize that, you know what, it's probably only going to take 6 visits for this person to restore their function.
Right.
So now we treat, and after the 6th visit, you've restored all of your function and you're feeling good. At that point in time, Medicare says, that's it. There is no more therapy needed. We are not going to reimburse for any more therapy.
Because you did what the guidelines called for. I got it.
We're following the Medicare guidelines.
I understand.
But yet that was after the 6th visit, but the doctor had written 12 visits.
Right.
Now, what ends up happening is that Medicare wins. Okay, they are going to say there's no need for further physical therapy, that the doctor in good faith decided to write 12 visits, but fortunately that wasn't needed. And so consequently, Medicare would then reimburse for the 6 visits, but if you decided to even attend those 6 visits after that, they would not reimburse for that.
Another area I'd like to go into, I know there's different types of therapy. Could you expand on that a little bit? Because, you know, we really don't know.
There's a lot of different types of therapy, and you know, therapy can vary from just doing exercise, from us teaching you exercise. Therapy can be very hands-on, very manual, what we call manual therapy. Manual therapy is when I am moving your joints, trying to get them to move correctly. There are different types of machines that we use. For example, ultrasound, which is the deepest form of heat that we have available to us. We have electrical stimulation. We have mechanical traction. All different kinds of modalities that are all trying to help the patient restore function. There's a whole nother broad category. If you look at, you know, there's the hands-on, there's the exercise, but then those are kind of the treatment techniques that we use to treat people who have orthopedic problems. But let's say, for example, there's the patient who comes in with a stroke. All right, they're going to need a different type of therapy. Again, a hands-on therapy, and trying to facilitate the restoration of their movement. So again, to classify types of therapy, I would say there's either the hands-on therapy or there's the exercise therapy. And usually I think good therapy uses
both.
Parts of both, right.
All right. Now, what constitutes the difference between land therapy and water therapy?
Very good question. Land therapy is our traditional therapy done in the clinic, the hands-on stuff, working a joint, but also therapy can be performed in a therapeutic pool.
A hot water pool.
In a hot water pool in which the therapist can still work on moving your joints. You can still work on exercise. It just takes gravity out of the equation. So now all of a sudden you maximize the benefits of buoyancy, you maximize unloading, and so all of a sudden now this person moves a whole lot better in the pool than they can move on land. Oftentimes, for what I use pool therapy for, it becomes the very good first step as well as the great sustaining step. So what I would say is that in the early stages, someone has a knee replacement. Once their incision is completely healed, because obviously you don't want to get into a pool in which you have an open wound, but once that wound is healed, start therapy in the pool, okay? Then there comes a point in time when I don't need to do the therapy in the pool anymore, but then it becomes the burden of the patient or the person to carry that through. Well, no longer do you need me anymore, but you can certainly do your exercises then in the water.
Now, what kind of advice would you give to our audience, like to avoid therapy?
It's a great question. Preventive therapy, stay moving.
Stay moving.
The person who sits too much is inviting trouble. All right.
Now, should the person go to their doctor and ask the doctor? The doctor knows the limbs.
Absolutely.
You know what scope they can use. Or did they go to a trainer?
I would say this. I think that the doctor should always be the first step.
That should be the primary.
Always.
All right. We're going to repeat that. The doctor.
The doctor should be the entry point to the healthcare system. The reason for that is that the physician has to know the entire person. So they need to know the chemistry. It's not just the mechanical functioning of the joint that the doctor knows. They know the chemistry behind it. What if a joint's not moving well because the reality is that someone has an infection and that infection has gone to the joint? Certainly, as a physical therapist, not qualified to treat that. Personal trainer's not qualified to treat that. You need your physician at that point in time to take the needed steps to overcome the medical condition that's there. That's the driver for the mechanical condition. So, if the problem is mechanical, then you would like the treatment to be mechanical. So the physician then orders the physical therapy. But if the problem's not mechanical, and a lot of times, you know, God forbid that someone comes in with back pain and they actually have a tumor in their back, which happens very rarely, but can happen. Do you want to see your physical therapist for when that is the scenario? Not really. I'd rather my doctor be managing that care. The doctor can order any type of diagnostic testing that needs to be done, x-rays, blood work, so the doctor becomes the foundation. After that, all of the rest of us are ancillary. We add to the problem. We add to the solution.
Oh, well, say somebody has a question. Do you have a website that they can go and ask you? What could you give the website out?
The Advocate website is advocatehealth.com, and I can be reached at my email address at scott.beckman1, the number 1, at advocatehealth.com.
Say that again.
Scott.Beckman, the number 1, at advocatehealth.com.
Now, this is a question I ask everybody. Now, where does your passion lie? What kind of gratification do you get out of being in this line of therapy?
The greatest part of my job is when you take that person who could not do something when they started therapy and all of a sudden now they can do it. That right there is the thrill of victory. And so consequently, helping that person succeed to a new level that they weren't able to do before, that's what gives me enjoyment in life.
Well, at what period, do you know, is it different ones with different ailments that you know they're going to make it, they're going to really come through this? Can you recognize this early?
I think so. I think I actually, after that first visit, you can kind of predict who's going to have success and who's not going to have success.
Is the attitude got a lot to do with it?
Absolutely. That's probably the greatest driver, is as to who gets better and who doesn't get better. It's the attitude of the person who has the problem.
Well, let's give out your email one more time because I think this is important. Give your email real slow.
Okay. Scott, S-C-O-T-T, dot Beckman, B-E-C-K-M-A-N, then the number 1, at advocatehealth.com. And Advocate Health is one word.
One word. Okay, you got all that. Well, you know what time it is now. We want you all to stay well, and I accumulate these type of broadcasts for you because we care about you. And we're in our 12th season, and we want you to live a long time. Our goal is to live forever. So when you come to the end of your rope, you tie a knot, and you hang on real tight. And you know why? Because the best is yet to come, and what we want you to do this week is catch the spirit.